decolonisation debate. But first, it's a Friday, so we look back on the week. The big economic story, of course, that midterm budget speech where the finance minister took a conservative approach to rein in our debt.
The most significant economic event this week was the midterm budget. Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan saying the green shoots of an economic upturn are there, but in a difficult growth environment, it's going to take collective action to develop them. Treasury is now expecting growth of 0.5% this year, rising to 1.3% in 2017 and 2% in 2018. Compared to 0.9%, 1.7% and 2.4% previously. Revenue is now expected to be 23 billion rand short of budgeted targets, so expect some tax rises in the February budget. Gordhan is mum on which taxes would be hiked. Universities and students will receive an additional 17 billion rand over the next 3 years, making them the biggest winner on Wednesday. That includes 7.6 billion to universities to compensate for the fees freeze for students whose families earn less than 600,000 rand a year, and another 9.2 billion to bolster the aid scheme NSFAS. While producer inflation numbers were also out this week, prices at the factory gate slowed sharply to 6.6% from 7.2%. Fuel price drops were the main driver behind the slowdown.
All right, back to education, and the ongoing fees must fall protests have reignited an even deeper debate in South Africa around the issue of decolonisation. So even if education were free in economic terms, would it be free in ideological terms? Colonialists established themselves as rulers. They redefined those colonised as lesser beings, often exploiting them for labour. The world has all changed, but the idea is that the shackles sometimes remain. Decolonisation critiques the racist assumptions in Western knowledge, the way we frame the way we see the world in terms of European and American knowledge. In South Africa, of course, it's linked to breaking free from notions of white supremacy. Well, Themba Gamedze will be tackling this issue at an event in Johannesburg organised by RealTalk this weekend. He's a well-known businessman, a member of several boards in the public and private sectors, and the former president of the Actuarial Society of South Africa. And he joins us now. Great to have you with us, Themba. So just as a start, it seems to me like there's two wild sides of the spectrum. On one side, people say, let's burn the books, let's get rid of science because it's Western. On the other side, a denial that this is even an issue. Where do you stand? How do we even start dealing with this?
I think the first thing is to recognize that that is very much what South Africa is about. We really do have those two extremes. And we have had basically from perpetuity. The issue is that now people with the voice, people with the education are actually being able to articulate the problems of alienation. And largely it's because people who feel that they have done everything that's necessary to enter the club, and they find that they still feel alienated, and hence this anger and this worry about will the future be any different. Whereas at the same time, the people, if you like, with privilege have always, in a sense, felt that nothing much is going to happen. I mean, why do revolutions happen? When a revolution happens, those who have lose everything. And yet if they had recognized that a revolution was about to happen, they could have perhaps negotiated and had a discussion which could have saved the day for both parties.
The one thing that's been strange to me is that it seems like it's a new debate. But when I was at Wits years ago, I studied English for a while, and we looked at literature from all over the world. There was already an understanding that there was too much emphasis perhaps on Dickens, historians looking at the conditions in Africa for years, how geography, how living in a desert affects you. And we're sort of acting like this is new, but hasn't the debate been going on in universities, and we should just keep having it, or is that being too simplistic?
I would say the debate has been happening, but it's just that I think there's a new generation of students who are perhaps looking at it more in a systems way, rather than seeing education as literally about perhaps a certificate people are asking questions, isn't education more about questioning, about the fundamentals of life, of society, of history? And so perhaps they're more vociferous than in the past. But I think they're calling for, if you like, a systematic approach, not just to education, but to sociology, to politics, to the economy. And so the issue of education has always been linked to things like outsourcing or to things like transformation. And for me, these are issues around diversity. To what extent do we really feel diversity is the best asset that we can have in a changing society? Do we really think it makes sense to be ruled by people who see the world all in the same way when so much is changing around us? And I think it's people who are perhaps willing to say, look, let's enter this debate, let's express it in language perhaps that hasn't been used in the past, and perhaps in another way, let's express our anger. Because up to now, the debate has been almost gentlemanly, people sort of proposing things. What about this? And when you feel you're not being listened to, perhaps there's a place for anger. I don't advocate burning the whole system down because we're going to have to pay for it again. But anger, I think, is a relevant emotion. And I think we're starting to see people who have been raised not to hide their feelings. I'm a baby boomer, and we bottle our feelings and we just get on with things. But this generation doesn't feel that that's the way to proceed.
Maybe the people who are scared of this debate feel that we could lose that diversity. Maybe it's a white fear that this will become, again, a black on white issue. Can we do it in a different way? You talk about a way of approaching this that can actually be rehumanizing. Just tell me some of your thoughts.
I think part of the problem is that if you look at these two sides, there are some people who are advocating almost a reversal, going back to apartheid. They would like to have their own little enclave where they can be self-determining. That we can't have. But there are other people who want to impose change unconstitutionally. And again, we can't have that. So what needs to happen is we need to recognize that we actually are in the same country. And because we're in the same country, there has to be a negotiation of some kind, where there's no way in which we're going to get past that issue. And in a negotiation, the first thing that's important is you've got to believe that the end result will actually be better for both of us. And therefore, we need to talk to each other and persuade each other that together we really are stronger. And I guess that's where we need to go. We need to go through those difficult conversations.
I think another writer has already pointed out that there's an opportunity here, maybe for African universities or South African universities to lead this body of knowledge, this debate, I guess.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, South Africans, we face a lot of issues here. And we have managed. Sometimes I feel that we as South Africans go towards the brink and we stare down in the abyss and think, should we jump? And then at the last minute, nah. And I hope
not this time.
And I hope we don't. But the point is that we are perhaps facing issues which are there in this rest of the world, that we're facing them more directly than other people are. There are lots of issues around disadvantage, around alienation. But in South Africa, perhaps, unlike many other places, we actually are addressing these issues. We just need leadership to lead the discussion. We need a roadmap about where we're going as a nation. Education is just one aspect. We've got things like the problem of technical skills. The German experiment and the Teutonic model is to emphasize technical skills rather than necessarily academic skills. But we've got problems in health, we've got problems in education, we've got problems in social security. And we need to have, if you like, what I'd like to see universities produce are systems thinkers, people who see the whole thing at once and who recognize what is important, what is first in line for implementation, what will follow afterwards, where the high leverage points are.
Well, what is a practical example of something we could do? Because there's all this talk, this language around decolonisation, and you talk about new spaces, new rules of engagement, a new model of curatorship, but there's a lot of that. It sounds a little bit highfalutin. How can this change things for somebody going to university, starting out, engaging with lecturers in a South African context?
I think there are two things. The first, I think we need to be able to tell our stories. At the moment, there's a lot of noise, and the noise is the noise of anger, but people aren't really telling their stories, and we're not talking to each other. We're rather shouting at each other. But I think the second thing about this kind of debate is that we need to recognize that within this area where black people have been, if you like, erased, in fact, they haven't been erased completely. I like to, for example, when I look at the Bible, Christianity is often regarded as a colonizing religion. But if you look, for example, at the great leader Moses, Moses is regarded as a Jewish leader, but Moses is African. He lived his whole life in Africa until he took the people out of Africa. It's an African liberation movement. Moses was married to a Sudanese woman. The Bible talks of women who helped to fund Jesus' ministry. The first person, for example, to come to the gospel in Acts was from Africa, and interestingly enough, he was a eunuch. And a eunuch, you start thinking transgender. So the way we read the Bible sometimes, the Bible itself and other media and other places where history is written, actually there is a lot of diversity. It's just that the story has been told in a way which has hidden that diversity.
All right, I wish we could talk for a very long time. We've run out of time. Thank you for giving us some of those thoughts on a very difficult topic, but fascinating. That was Themba Gamedze, an author, a speaker rather, at RealTalk. That's an event in Johannesburg this weekend.